Good morning, guys. Everybody can see us now. We are now live in Crappy Professionals. How's everybody's morning going today?
Very well.
Oh well.
I appreciate the three of you joining today. This is going to be a really great conversation. It's a really important conversation. And, just looking at 2020, it's been quite the year, hasn't it? And if we've learned one thing, it's that you have to stay positive to make it through. And this year we've experienced a pandemic. There's been racial injustice all across the nation, and it's going to get better. And we're here today all because of Eugenia Brown. Eugenia is a bright spot in a tough world. She's based in Charlotte, North Carolina, and she goes by BlackBeerChick. And she wanted to make a difference and bring more women of color to the table and into the craft beer conversation. She decided she didn't want to be a token Black girl anymore. She wanted to do something about it. And that's how the Road to 50 was born. And quickly it became the Road to 100 initiative. Now, the Road to 100 initiative is an educational and mentorship program she helped create to help women of color connect and gain access to the craft beer industry. By helping women receive their level 1 Cicerone certification, the program aims to diversify and make the craft beer community more inclusive. Her initiative, it covers the cost of the exam. It helps give more women of color equal tools to succeed in craft beer. Now, to raise money, Eugenia had a fantastic shirt. It's More Bridges, Less Barriers t-shirt. I should have worn it today. And the response when she put out this t-shirt design was overwhelming. People bought the tee or simply donated money, and she hit her goal in 3 days. And meanwhile, the Cicerone program caught wind, and she decided to double the initiative's impact to the 100, which it is today. She raised over $8,000, and this left her with enough money to initially help 20 women take the written portion of the Cicerone certification program. Now, while her program does cover the cost, the true value is in the community she creates. It's bringing people together, like the four of us, to learn, study, and have important conversations. And that's why we're here today, because the three of you are all recipients of Eugenia's program. You're on your way to becoming, level 1 Cicerone certified. Now, Sarah, I want to start with you. You're to the right of me. How did you become aware of Eugenia's program, and what do you do in the craft beer industry?
Hi. So actually, I have a really good friend, Ashley Randolph, that I used to converse with and hang out with all the time back when I started the chapter of Barley's Angels in Las Vegas several years ago, and I was really into looking at some of the craft wear, like T-shirts and different things like that to wear that would bring awareness to the Black industry portions. And I saw her t-shirt and I purchased it. Then I was telling Ashley about it. And then she's like, you guys totally need to connect. You've been doing this for years and now you have the pink boots in Alaska and that's where I live and in Whistle, Alaska. And I'm the head manager for a brewery called Bleeding Hearts um, Brewery here in Alaska. And I've been doing that for a couple years. I worked for Gabe Fletcher at Anchorage Brewing Company. I've worked at Odd Man Rush. It's a hockey-based themed brewery here in Alaska as well. And I'm the only Black female brewer, and associate brewer is what most people call us up here when you're not a head brewer, but you go around to other breweries and do that. And then this past April got our Pink Boots chapter finally opened and ready to go. So I'm the lead for the chapter up here in Alaska.
So to confirm, you actually discovered her shirt before you knew about the initiative?
Yeah, yes, I did. And then I started looking into it and I was just like, this is amazing. I definitely need to get as many of these t-shirts and as many of her stuff. And I put her stickers everywhere I go. And if I'm at a brewery that has cans and I can drink out of the can, I put my koozie on. And when I go camping out here in Alaska, I take it wherever I go. And I got t-shirts for my kids and we're all we're all wearing the chick and
Oh,
doing
that's
the thing. So
fantastic. So
yeah.
when did you decide to apply for the scholarship?
Actually, on a whim, I've applied for the scholarship through Pink Boots a few times and felt like my essay was pretty affirmed and whom I was and what I was looking for. And every year I've been turned down for it. So that made me a little sad. And just actually the day before the or the you could turn in the essay, um, I said, "You just do it. Let's just do it. Let's just try." Because I had already finished the Road to Cicerone 6 classes. I've already done all this. I had already done all of the things. I had already done my certification, and so I just sat down one day and just did it really fast. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll be selected this time. If not, there's another round. So let's just give it a try. So I did.
Now, I think we're going to dive into what you guys wrote your essays coming up shortly, because I think that's a really important part of the conversation we're going to have today. Now, Kelsey, we're excited to have you today as well. And I know you're not too far from me. You're in the Washington, D.C. area. Now, what do you do in the craft beer world, and what encouraged you to get involved with Eugenia and her initiative?
Yeah. So I have been really into beer for a long time. And I started working in beer a little bit more, I guess, directly and professionally earlier last year when I started working for City Brew Tours. So right now I'm a guide in Washington, D.C., and I lead beer tours when we're not in a pandemic in person, and currently virtually of different microbreweries and craft breweries around the city, which is pretty wonderful for me. So that's what I do in my spare time, but it's not my full-time job. I have known about Eugenia and BlackBeerChick for a bit of time. I went to Fresh Fest last year, and I think prior to going to Fresh Fest, I was super excited. I had like my registration really far in advance, and for folks who aren't familiar, Fresh Fest is like the only beer festival that's focused on Black brewers and Black folks in general. So in getting prepared, I was just super excited, and I think I went through this whole wave of following like a million like Black women who were doing beer things on Instagram, and so she was definitely one of them. So I followed her for a while, and I've been in the midst over the past few months of developing a scholarship for women of color in beer with City Brew Tours with a couple of folks on my leadership team that has a similar mission. But in thinking about that, I was like, wow, I love this. And also I'm not eligible to apply for this. And I really want to dig a little bit deeper. And so I thought this was a perfect opportunity. And I finished the certified beer server exam earlier this year. And so I was really excited to kind of have some support for this next step.
No, congratulations. I know having that community support you is extremely important for this. Now, Gloria, on to you. I know before we hopped on air, you have been all over the place. You had mentioned Ohio, Florida, and now in your Syracuse, New York. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am originally from Syracuse, New York. I lived in Miami, Florida on and off for about 10 years. I started my craft beer journey about 11 years ago. I started blogging, writing about craft beer and travel, and then that led to some opportunities working as a beer writer for a newspaper and magazines, and then I volunteered at beer fests, and so I got to know the community in upstate New York, the craft beer community there, and I just knew I wanted to be in it. So moving to Florida, I pretty much did the same thing there, and I've been writing and working in the beer scene for a while now, and I thought, I really would benefit from getting at least the first level of the certified beer server exam. So I was studying for it in about March or April when the pandemic hit because we had the time. And I was on Instagram and looking around and Eugenia's name popped up. And so I started following her and I saw what she was doing. And I wrote her an email right away and I said, what you're doing is great. I would love to be a part of this. And that's pretty much how I got to where I am now. And I did pass the exam in September. So I'm really happy about that and going to level 2 now.
Congratulations. Now, Gloria, while I've got you, I was just reading one of the articles you wrote, and you had mentioned that for a long time you kept your race out of your kind of craft beer bubble. What made you decide that that was an important part of you to bring into the craft beer world?
Well, it always was. It's not that it never wasn't. It's just I think I felt like I needed to prove myself as a woman in craft beer first and foremost. I just felt like I needed to position myself. I just didn't really want to talk about things that I guess can be a little uncomfortable, like race, politics, religion. I just always felt like that wasn't something that I wanted to do necessarily for myself. But then, the pandemic hit and, all these Black Lives Matter movements and, just watching the news and all these horrible things happening in our country. I don't know. It just kind of opened a door for me, or turned on a light in my head, I guess you could say. And I just thought, you know what, if now isn't the time, when is? You know, this has been in me all my life, and it's something I've wanted to express for a long time. And this just seemed to be like the right time to do that.
Now, a question for everybody. Obviously Eugenia's initiative is designed for women of color. But, Laura, you kind of separated just now. You talked about your experiences as a woman first, then you talked about your experience as a person of color. How do those experiences compare, and which do you feel, is there a greater struggle with regard to one or the other, or are they both, challenges you feel you're constantly struggling with? Can you each speak a little bit to your experiences in craft beer as both? Anyone feel free to step up to the mic on that one.
Definitely. I've been in the craft beer industry for over 12 years now, and traveling from California, Las Vegas, and now to Alaska. It is incredibly hard to not only be a female in this industry, but a strong voiced female. And for me, I know for a fact that me pushing myself and being at every possible event I could be at is what has made it so that I have actually, you know, not, to make sure that I'm like at the table. Like I have a seat at the table amongst all the guys, mostly bearded white guys that, definitely feel that they know way more than I do. They dumb me down every time, tell me about, an IPA or how the variations of IPAs are, and, what a hazy is and all these things. And um, I started educating myself the second I walked into my very first homebrewers craft beer hangout one day in Las Vegas. And after that, it was just, I was hooked. I had to know more and more and more, and started adapting and achieving as much education as every single guy that was next to me at a bar. And so every time I would walk into a craft beer anything, I just continued to be able to have that conversation with them over and over again. And now I find it more important to immediately gravitate towards the females in the group and start talking to them. If anyone of color ever walks into a brewery that I am at, or I am over, running the taps at or anything, I definitely try to make sure that, all of their answers, or all their questions are answered, and what they want to know is going on. It's a lot different in the worlds that I live in. Las Vegas obviously is a melting pot. That's a whole different world. It's a lot of tourists. It's a lot of different things. Up here in Alaska, it really is that situation where I am a token person of color, or the only person of color, and so I stand out like a sore thumb a lot of the time, or a positive thumb, I guess, because a lot of people know me. They know that they can come and ask me questions. They know I am very very open, very honest about things, and definitely put out some reviews whenever I can, and be a part of our community here. So it's
I
a
think the
little bit
challenge.
different. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the challenge our industry faces, and you mentioned you're one of the only people of color in Alaska in the brewing world that you're in right now. And I think that's a challenge we face in craft beer as a whole. There's so many places in the country like Alaska where they aren't as, diverse as, say, Las Vegas. But I think it's very important that people in craft beer in those locations, they need to understand that we do have an issue that we're fighting. And while they might not be able to do a whole lot to increase the diversity of their specific tap room, if we have the support of everyone in the industry as a whole, it's going to make our industry as a whole so much stronger, even if they're not going to see the changes necessarily as firsthand as you may in other places.
Absolutely. And it is something that I see in my community, that they are so very much accepting. And it's not even about like, oh, it's Sarah Perez, she's the black lady that, brews, or she works at Bleeding Heart. It's Sarah Perez because they know I'm educated and I understand craft beer. I've been, working on my Cicerone portion for a long time. Back 6 years ago, I had started the whole program and had my beer server certification. And then when they re-upped the whole program just recently, I was like, I need to start from scratch. So I actually am going back through the program so that I feel more validated in some of the information, and going with the BJCP courses and understanding those guidelines and understanding the Brewers Association courses as well. And, you know, wanting to do even more as a brewer and as a person that's out there, not just in the beer community, but I also started making kombucha out here with a local kombuchery, and just want to get with our distilleries and more things. So for me, it's just making sure that this is a large community that maybe, you know, obviously my whole life I've been very unique in the way that I have perceived myself as a person of color, or a black woman, or anything of those, I guess titles or features that we have. I am Sarah Perez. I honestly don't ever introduce myself as anything more than just that, and most people are kind of caught off by that that you just you know and they're like, well, how is it being a black person in Alaska and everything else? And it's like, I don't know. How's it's just same as I've, lived in Las Vegas and California and any other state that I've ever lived in. It's the same, because it's not just about being that black person. It's about being a person that can also um, have a voice, stand in amongst everybody else in the crowd, and don't let yourself feel out of place. Make sure that you are being seen and you're being heard. And more than anything for me is that I want to stand next to Gloria, and I want to stand next to Kelsey and you, Andrew, and I want to be that person that's always like next to somebody else, that's helping them feel greater and more achieved as well. So.
No, I absolutely love your positive outlook and just the importance of just education and staying true to that. No, Sarah, that's absolutely amazing. I hope we're all sharing a beer together in better times.
Definitely.
Now, Kelsey, on to you. Talk a little bit about your experiences, what you might have touched on in the essay portion. What got you to the point you are today in the craft beer, and what are some of your experiences being a woman and a person of color in the industry?
Yeah, I wish I could remember my essays that I wrote in verbatim, because those probably are a bit more articulate than I can be now. But I think I talked a lot about community and the sort of exclusion that is felt when you feel yourself being the only one. And I, as like a younger black woman, when I first started getting into beer, saw that pretty regularly. And so I spent a lot of time seeking spaces where I could find people who were a little bit more similar to me. So I think that's a lot of what I wrote about. I first came into like my exposure of loving beer when I was living abroad in Holland. And that's a little bit different because I think that drinking good beer is a bit more of the norm, I would say. Maybe not necessarily good beer, but beer is a bigger part of the culture, I would say, than it is in the US. And so then coming back here and rediscovering that for myself left me with, I think, a lot of questions. And kind of going back to your question about intersecting identities, I'm a black woman and I'm also queer, and those are things that will never, those are inextricably linked pieces of who I am. And I think I also do a lot of my work, my day work as well, is in the space of equity and racial justice, specifically in food and agriculture, which is a similar field. But those are things that will never not be present from me and how I'm perceived and what I do and who I'm speaking to and how I'm speaking to them. And so I think for me to want to leave that behind would be would be a real challenge, because it influences how I'm perceived in every way. Yeah.
What do you do when you're not, working with the city brew tours? You mentioned in food and agriculture. What's your position there?
I work on the grassroots advocacy side of federal food and agricultural policy. And so a lot of my work currently in my role is centering around equity and justice and food sovereignty.
Now, Sarah mentioned it a couple minutes ago. She mentioned, at one point, she didn't want to be Sarah Perez, the black lady in Alaska. She wanted to be Sarah Perez and be able to have a conversation about beer just with anybody else because that's who she is. Do you feel you have evolved in craft beer to become, people look at you more than just the token in the room? You know, what steps have you taken to show people that you are more than just Kelsey Watson, the black lady in craft beer? You know, how have you asserted yourself and claimed that seat at the table, and what can others do to do the same?
Yeah, I think that's a hard question to answer. I mean, I certainly don't desire to be tokenized, but I also don't know that not being the black lady in beer is something that I desire. Like, that is a piece of my identity that will always be a piece of my identity, and that's okay with me. And it's a way that I will always be seen. Like I don't know that that's necessarily a piece of it that I am interested in shirking, but I would appreciate to not be assumed like I don't know anything. I spent some time, of course, like I said, doing tours in person a lot more frequently. And I've had some long conversations with some of the folks that I work with in positions of power with in the company that I work and do beer things for, about some of the experiences that I have had, because primarily all of my customers are white. Largely white men, oftentimes like on bachelor parties and things like that. And like being someone who is a person of color in general, but specifically a black woman in a city that is already really highly charged by politics in this era that we're living in right now, and our current administration is often a challenge. And I've had people say some pretty ridiculous and like inappropriate things. And so to be able to be I want to be able to feel safe, safe enough to say that that's not okay. And that's definitely something that I find to be a challenge. And I don't know that I have a good answer to that yet, because I think that that's a much longer answer and a deeper question. But it's something that I'm seeking, and I don't want to be in spaces where I can't tell you that what you just said to me is inappropriate without me feeling like I'm in sort of danger or uncomfortable.
No, I agree. I mean, everyone's safety is of utmost importance. And I think the ability to have these conversations and have more of these conversations is a must in the current state of not just craft beer, but the world as a whole. Now, Gloria, we're going to come to you now. Now, because you are a published author, I've read a few of your pieces. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about, you know, your experiences being a brand ambassador and how they've got you to the place you are these days. I would love to hear about your experiences.
Yeah, definitely. So I started out in Syracuse as a brand ambassador for Great Lakes out of Ohio, out of Cleveland. And I was the first brand ambassador that I hired. They were just starting this program, and it was new for everybody. And so it was really something that I cherished, because it really got me into learning more about the beer styles, learning about the stories behind the beer labels, meeting people at beer festivals. You know, it just brought a lot of more interaction into my life than before. And then I also worked as a brand ambassador for Concrete Beach Brewing in Miami, Florida, and that was an extension of that as well. Talking to people about beers, getting to know the craft beer community in general in South Florida was something that was really new to me. So I really got to know a lot of people who I still consider friends to this day, even though I don't live in Miami anymore. But I would say that being an ambassador really gives you a unique perspective on, you know, not just the beers, but what the brewery that you work for, what they stand for, what their initiatives are, what matters to them. You really get more of a nitty gritty feel for it when you're actually working for a company, working for a brewing company. And so I've had nothing but wonderful experiences working as brand ambassador. It was a great way to get into the industry. It really was.
Now, you mentioned in one of your articles that you worked for an Irish brewing company at some point, and you had an experience, you know, a potential customer, you know, reacted to you a little inappropriately. Can you talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, sure. So last year I was working for Sullivan's Brewing Company. They're an Irish brewing company out of Kilkenny, Ireland. And I was newly hired as their sales representative for upstate New York. And so I did a lot of the things besides the selling, you know, the beers to, you know, on and off premise. I also was doing brand ambassador type work, like, you know, doing samples, giveaways, that kind of thing. So one day in particular, I was working at a craft, not a craft beer bar, but kind of like a hometown Irish American bar in Syracuse. And I had a tray of beers that I was passing around and going up to people and asking if they'd like to try a new beer from Ireland. And one customer, potential customer, looked me up and down and said, "Why are you representing the company? Shouldn't you be Irish or look Irish?" And I didn't really know how to respond to that, because what can I say? And so it took me aback, and all I could say at that moment was, because they hired me because I know my stuff. And then I left the situation because it was just so negative. I didn't care whether or not the customer liked the beer or not. But that was the one and only time that I really felt like specifically, brought out, for what I look like. Nobody's ever said anything to me about what I look like as a Latina American woman. Nobody's ever said anything to me about my appearance or my features until that time, and it was not pleasant.
Yeah, I'm sorry you had that experience. It's definitely unfortunate. Hopefully everyone else at that, Irish bar treated you with much more respect. Now, that kind of touches on a point we hear about a lot, with the struggles of being a woman, a person of color in craft beer. You feel like you have to work harder than your male counterparts, and obviously all of you have talked about, Sarah, I see you smiling over there. You've talked a lot about having to just immerse yourself and learn everything you possibly can about craft beer. And one thing I love about craft beer truly is the learning that you go into when you walk into a brewery, the opportunity to learn about the beers, learn about the history, learn about the person behind the bar. But it's frustrating when that feels like an obligation. And it seems like for you three, you feel you have had to take the dive into that educational step, whether you like to or not. Talk a little bit about, if you could, how that struggle has been for you. And, I don't want to say it's proving yourself, but it's the steps you've had to do to take that seat at the table. And that's not something that I think's fair. It's not fair at all. And hopefully over time, it's not going to be a mandate for you to have to, spend those extra hours learning and just do it because you feel like you have to, but do it because you want to. And that's what craft beer is about. It's about learning. So I would love to hear about a little bit more of the experiences you three have felt just having to prove yourself, unfortunately, in the industry to get where you are.
Yeah, I definitely, I've noticed, I think from the very, very beginning for myself, is the fact that, being invited to a homebrew meeting one day and, really falling in love with the craft of beer itself, and then the art behind it that all of these guys were posting and bringing into the whole conglomerate of that day, realizing that I had never brewed a beer before. I had no idea how any of it had even worked or really understood any of it. So for me to make sure that I was right there next to them, I had to start educating myself and doing all of that. But it wasn't a guy saying, "Hey, Sarah, come on over to my house," or we're all going to be brewing next weekend. Just come on over and learn how to do this. We'd love to show you, teach you some more things. It was, I had to teach myself. It wasn't so many times that until years later where I was actually invited to be a part of, a brew day or an afternoon or anything like that. And then once I found out about hanging out with a group of friends that I always refer to ourselves as the beer nerds wherever I've lived. In Las Vegas, we called ourselves the Share Bears. We shared every single Sunday. We had
I love
one
it.
bar that we would go to. We sat down, we critiqued beers, we drew out explanations of it. We really thought about like the whole aspects of every single style of beer. Sometimes we, brought in radlers and we did different aspects of it. And that way, adding different ingredients and really kind of picking apart a beer and doing the thing. One day, the ladies and I, we were all chatting and we said, we need our own club, and then that's kind of how Barley's Angels started for us in Las Vegas. So we opened our own chapter. We had at one time, I felt like we had probably 150 women all involved in Barley's Angels in Las Vegas, and just educating women, going around to different breweries, different craft beer bars, doing all of that because we actually were tired of feeling alienated from our group of nerd friends for the first time. And we were just like, no, we want to have our own voices, because a lot of the time my palate and what I was tasting was completely different, or something changed from what the guys were tasting. And so that was frustrating in that aspect, because I know what I was reading about, and I knew that I was correct in this, but the guys were always like, no, 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 you're wrong, and it would just go back and forth with that. And then once I actually started working at a craft beer bar and getting more education and understanding, just the whole elementals of all of it, it was a lot of mansplaining and kind of genderfying me as a female. Oh, she doesn't know. She's just a waitress here in Las Vegas. Another pretty girl, another pretty face, things like that. And it was like, no, actually, let me go ahead and walk you through the aspects of all of your whole flight that you just chose to get, and what the brewers went through, and where the brewery is, and where the locations are, and what's the background of their history and things like that. And for me, those were the moments that I was able to kind of pull myself away from even most men, because they can't even give that history lesson because they don't know. And so, as a woman now in the industry, not only working as taproom manager and things like that, but also as a brewer, again, it's me educating myself prior to getting into a brewery, learning their clientele, what their beer styles are like, things like that, and then presenting what the recipe should be to the head brewer and the brewmaster, and then letting them know, I've taken some time, I've really educated myself about your clientele and what you're about, so this is the beer style that I think that would be best for you. And they're all always taken aback at the fact that I've taken that much time, or even cared enough to look into who they are, what they are, when I'm going to do a Pink Boots beer, or a collaboration brew with just myself or something like that. So in this industry, it's very interesting to see that you're not always seen as the equal entity as you are, and bringing something valid to the table that they have as well, because they were just taught. They didn't go to school. They're not educating themselves continuously. They might read a couple articles or here and there, but most head brewers that I know have not really been delving into the educational portion as much as all of us really do, and really
Sarah,
have
what you
been.
just said, that is absolutely amazing. It has so many levels to it. First off, it's amazing how much time and dedication you've taken into just learning about craft beer and your passion for the industry. I absolutely love it. But it's also so unfortunate that you have had to do that to make sure you can gain the respect of others. I mean, that's unfortunate. And in your experiences over time, have you seen our industry improve, or how much further do you, I mean, we obviously have a long way to go, but are you seeing a slow climb where
I
it's
am.
getting better?
I do. Me myself, I have been in this industry now, like I said, 12 years, starting in the very beginning, not knowing anything, and knowing as advanced as some of my female counterparts are across all of this industry that I have been a part of, from San Diego all the way around. I see us progressing. I see us finally getting into those jobs, and tackling the barriers, and coming forward as oh wait, you're right. You probably do know way more than me. And I get the pat on the back now. I get the atta girl, or the high fives, or whatever it is. I'm getting the recognition for the first time in a long time. And I'd like to, as much as I've said it to all of my friends and family and stuff, I would like, I'm hoping that all of this isn't just because um of the time in our lives right now, and 2020 being what 2020 is, but I'm hoping that this is actually because we are becoming more educated. We are advancing ourselves. We are taking the initiative every single time to step up, stand next to somebody else, and do the proper thing, rather than just worry about, like for Kelsey, that uh, on those beer tours, I'm cringing at just the thought of even having to deal with anything like that, because I can't tell you how many beer tours I've done, and feeling scared for a moment that you're educating and you're doing something, but also worried that someone is in the background possibly trying to, could harm you or do anything. I don't even, I can't
Sarah, that
fathom
makes me
any of
sick.
those
I mean, as
emotions.
a
Yeah.
white male in craft beer, what you just said, it makes me sick. It makes me cringe. I don't want anyone, no matter who they are, to feel that way. So
Yeah.
I
No.
really hope, if anything, just anyone listening can understand how real this is. And this is something you three deal with daily. Kelsey, talk a little bit about what Sarah just mentioned, taking people who look like me primarily on tours. Are you seeing improvements? Are you seeing people willing to listen? Are you feeling like every day you have to go out there to gain their respect? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm a little bit too nascent as like a beer professional to talk much about changes that I've seen. But I will say that I think it's pretty cool what both Sarah and Gloria have done for many years of their career. And I also think that there is like some kind of fun and interesting power in possessing knowledge that like proves people wrong. And I think that's probably a part of why we do it. Like, aside from just the sheer interest of this subject and thing that we really love and appreciate, yeah, I think that there is something to say about like being able to prove people wrong. But I also don't know that I feel like I don't know that I'm. I think, Andrew, you used the words, maybe you said gain respect or something you said in your last sentence. I don't know if that's necessarily my goal. Like I'm not interested in proving myself to people in that way. I would rather have them do the work to shift their mindset so they're not coming in here expecting that I don't know what I'm talking about. Like, that's their job. That isn't my job. I can do my own work and figure out like what I'm doing and know what I'm talking about, but I don't feel the need to prove that to someone else if they're coming in here with the assumption that I don't know what I'm talking about, which definitely happens. And yeah, taking people on tours is an interesting thing because, of course, they're drinking. And again, like being in a city that's already like politically charged and people are coming from out of town, like there's a lot of interesting and like not ideal interactions that have the potential to happen and sometimes do happen. And yeah, I think that it's people like to think that they know more than you just in general. I think as like a person of color, like in a lot of places, like it expands in many parts of our lives aside from just beer. But yeah, it's definitely like an underestimation of like what your knowledge and skill set is. I think that it's been an interesting few months as far as people making statements about what they stand for and what they care about and this, that, and the other. So I guess maybe I'm hopeful for change in that way. I think that, again, like I do a lot of my own work in justice and equity, and I think a lot of the statements are like quite shallow and without much sustainability, which I think is really unfortunate. And as like women of color who are in this industry, these are pieces of our identity that will be long-standing, like beyond everyone's like fascination with, Black Lives Matter in this moment, because that will always be something that we have to consider and think about. Sarah, you came off of mute. I don't know if you were going to say something here.
No, sorry. I was trying not to cough on air.
Yeah. So I guess I say all of that to say that I really enjoy what I do, and I want this set of knowledge because I like it, and because there are pieces of this work that I think that people who look like me and people who have intersecting identities in the same way that I do should have more access to, and that's information and knowledge that I want to share. But I don't necessarily do it because I have any interest in gaining the respect of white men who have dominated this industry for decades.
You mentioned how active Black Lives Matter has been in 2020. Do you feel that has brought a lot more importance to the issue of better justice for all this year, or have all these processes and beliefs been something you put into your life way prior to all everything we've gone through this year?
Yeah, I mean, I again I'm not someone who shies away from conversations about race and identity, in part because I can't. Like, as being a woman of color, a lot of things are said to you, and like as a Black woman from the Midwest who've grown up around like primarily like white people for most of my life, like those are never conversations I've been able to avoid. And so for me, it's not something that's new. This has always been a part of who I am and what I'm interested in seeking and the community and the world that I wish to build. And I think it's very interesting to see it play out so publicly, so quickly, and in response to something so violent, because none of this is new to Black people in general, and people of color also. Like, none of this is new at all. This is things we've known that this has gone on for a long time. So to see people, I'm getting an echo. To see people now super interested. I think that there are things that need to happen, but I hope that they will be backed by a lot of resources and time and energy that will make these conversations that won't just be happening right.
And it kind of goes back to something Sarah was saying too, that we're almost having a moment, and a moment's a funny way to put it, because just like you mentioned, these are things you've been facing your entire life. Do you feel there's value in seizing the moment right now, though, to get things, the momentum flowing a little bit better so people can understand, they can learn, we can help us move in a direction to be better?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm getting an echo. I think that yes, to an extent, but I also think that if that is coming at the expense of like energy and labor from people of color, but specifically Black people who are working in fields that they're quote unquote underrepresented or what we like to say is underserved, then I don't necessarily know that I think that that's the most useful thing. I don't think that racism is a job for people of color to solve, like, simply put. So sure, I guess seizing the moment, but I think that it's come at the expense of like, I mean, I've witnessed it in the work that I'm doing. And as much as I've been supported by City Brew Tours folks, it's still a company that has an entirely white leadership team. And I think that they want to try, but I've also been able to bear witness to like how different our starting points are and how much work it will take to get people to a place that is not, I don't know, not performative, but I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to be able to do this in a way that makes sense and that will last for a long.
No, I agree. No, thanks for sharing all that. No, Gloria, on to you. I mean, there's been so many points we've just discussed. I love to hear a little bit about more your experiences right now and where you see us going in a positive direction, what we can do to get there.
Well, I think in the beer industry in particular, I'm getting an echo too. Can you hear me?
You.
Okay, I was just getting an echo, sorry. So what I was saying is, I think right now with the beer industry, I'm still getting an echo. I'm really sorry about that.
I think, Andrew, when you mute, the echo goes away.
Okay. All right, there, that's better. I'm really sorry about that. No, what I think is there is a momentum right now, as the ladies were saying. I think, whenever there's an opportunity to have your voice heard, unfortunately, it has been, because of violence and, all the negativity that's been spread lately. But I think if, you just say what's on your mind and, speak your truth, I think that's really, the best way to go about these things. Like I said, in the beer industry, it's a little bit, it's different because, this is an environment where it's all about, conviviality and getting together and being social. And, having this COVID, this pandemic, we're not even able to really do those kinds of things. So forging a voice in the middle of a pandemic, I think, is like doubly challenging. But I think that's even more reason to have these kinds of discussions like we're having right now.
That's an interesting way to look at it, because you and Kelsey, your belief about using the moment right now, and I like I said, I don't like to use that word, but you both kind of touched on whether we should refer to it as that. I think it's more an opportunity. I think that that's a better way to look at it, because when you have people's attention, it's a good idea to educate. And I think we need to really, focus on that education. Now, just speaking with you three, all three of you are very well traveled. How have your experiences differed in different places that you live? I mean, Gloria, from north to south, Sarah, I mean, Vegas to Alaska, and Kelsey, I know you're in DC now, and you also mentioned the Midwest. How have your experiences changed based on location? Anyone feel free to hop in on that one. Sarah?
Yeah, I've lived in, Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas, and San Diego, and all of these different places, but I don't think I've ever really encountered one area that is worse in racism than the next. Like each of us have known and see, no matter what, racism is going to be here. It's not going away. It's not going to be something that's going to just magically disappear one day because, because 2020 happened. Um, I'm 46 years old. I have 5 children. I'm half Black. I was raised by white parents. I I don't know how to explain whom I am as an exterior to others, or want to ever explain that. Like Kelsey was saying, I don't want that to be, you know, something that I have to have a conversation with every single time. But being in California, raised in San Diego County, um, by very non-traditional family ways or views that other people would see as, oh, well, that's why you're the way you are, or that, you're obviously half Black, but you're more white than anything, or different characteristics of that. I see that, being someone that has gone around and been to different places and been to different cities, um, again, I present myself. I walk into a room with my head held high. I have confidence within myself, whether or not I'm screaming internally, which I usually am. I still make sure that I just don't. I do it without the fear that I'm being picked apart at that moment. Um, and that's just me as a person. That's whom I am. But I don't think that, from one state to another, that it has changed dramatically, in the way I know that people are talking. I know the words are in the background. I know that those things are said, or wow, she's very articulate for, someone of her color, or any of those types of things. I know all of those things are being said, but I guess maybe I've just been so shocked in my life and my raising that I just don't really hear it as much as I probably should, and I could just continue to go. And I don't let that stop me, because that's not my initiative. My initiative is to talk beer, speak beer, educate about beer, learn something else from somebody else that I possibly can, and keep going. So, um, all of these different states and all these different communities, they all have it. Everything is there. It's just whether or not I'm going to let that bother me today, because it's just not its day.
I absolutely love that. Now, Kelsey and Gloria, what about your thoughts from location to location? Have you experienced any differences, similarities, any just general feedback when going from one to another? Gloria?
Yeah, like I said, I'm from Syracuse, New York, born and raised. So, it's a medium-sized city in upstate New York, very northeastern. So I guess you could say I grew up with those kinds of ideals. And I grew up as one of the few people of color in my community. People had only been either one color or another. There was never anything in between. So like when I started going to school, it was like, oh, this is something we've never seen before. But I never ever, growing up in upstate New York, felt any sort of isolation or marginalization. But I always felt like something was missing in terms of connecting to a culture, let's say. Moving to Miami was a totally different experience. Miami is, as far as I can recall, about 60% Latino. And so when I went down there, it was the total opposite of my upbringing. I was now a part of the majority, which you would think would be really comfortable, and it was to a certain extent. But within the divisions of the Latino community, you've got Cubans, you've got Argentinians, you've got Mexicans, so like there was even those subdivisions were a little disconcerting. But I would have to say I felt really at home there when it comes to craft beer, the craft beer scene. I would have to say that down in South Florida, it feels like, one big, I don't want to say one big party and make it sound like what you see on TV, but it really is very convivial down there. Everybody wants to see everybody else do really well. And that's not to say that that's not true in upstate New York, because in Syracuse, everybody is warm. The craft beer community is very, very tight and supports one another. It's just done in a different cultural context, but I think the feeling is the same.
Have you seen that change over time, going, from New York, away from New York, back to New York? Have you seen it shift in a positive direction?
Well, I've seen changes. I don't know about positive or negative per se. I've been to Miami when there was no craft beer scene, when it was just all mojitos and the pale light lagers of South American countries, and that was it. So to see that change to a whole new emerging culture within the context of a very unique part of the country, I thought that was a really interesting and promising thing. Syracuse, upstate New York already was kind of in the craft beer scene, early 90s kind of thing. It's grown a lot. In terms of what I see with diversity, it's getting there little by little, but it's a very welcoming community too. If you come from out of town and you come visit me or come visit, my area, I think you'll find it really welcoming to everybody.
And Kelsey, on to you. You mentioned you were from the Midwest. Where were you from originally?
I'm originally from Michigan, from Southwest
Michigan. So have your experiences going from Michigan to DC, you interact with, I'm sure, so many different kinds of diverse people just in that city. How have your experiences varied from city to city?
Not massively, to be honest. Like, I'm still, and now I live in Michigan, or lived in Michigan, in communities that were predominantly white, went to a university that was a predominantly white institution. And so, it hasn't really shifted too much. Now I've moved to DC, where it was once at one time called Chocolate City, and has a really large Black population, which I think is really incredible, but is also facing a lot of gentrification, which is another issue that craft beer, I think, doesn't address enough. But so I don't know, between those two places, not drastically. I think my experience living abroad was definitely a little bit different. But I also think it's interesting to hear both Sarah and Gloria speak, and also consider my own thoughts and perspectives and experiences. But I think it's really important to note that, like, the three of us are all fair-skinned women of color who are also cisgender women. And so our experience in living different places as it relates to race is going to be completely different from someone who is a darker skinned Black person, or who is unambiguously a person of color. And I think I'm Black and I'm biracial. And I was also raised by a white mother. And that has a lot to do with how I interact. And my proximity to whiteness is very different than that of other people. And so I think the three of us speaking on how our experiences with race in different places and how we relate to that are going to be very different than if you speak to people who are not us. I will say, living in, I spent some time in college living in a small town in the Netherlands, which is where I first really developed a love of beer. And race there is still very present, and racism is real everywhere. But the context and history with which I think people operate their racism is different. And so it showed up in slightly different ways. And I think being a light-skinned Black woman who looked like a lot of the people who were from countries that the Dutch colonized were that like was very much an advantage to me. And that was like, I operate from a massive perspective of privilege in that way, because I looked like these people that they would consider Dutch because of all of that history of like longstanding colonization and racism. But because of that, like I wasn't considered like abnormal. And I absolutely had interactions that were like, you know, not ideal, as they do in many places. But yeah, I wasn't mistreated. I was like very much assumed to be a part of the general populace, and was integrated in that way. And I think that's another thing, is like being assuming that we have a desire to assimilate is also like playing to this proximity of whiteness that I think all of us that you're talking to right now occupy in one way or another. And it happens a lot in craft beer.
No, that's an extremely important, valid point you made there about the proximity to whiteness. And, you know, when I set up this conversation today, I had no idea what the three of you looked like. I just knew that you were involved with Eugenia's initiative, and I know you were doing big things in craft beer. And it just happenstance that that topic came up just now. But I think it's definitely something worth diving into a little bit further. And I wish we had time to go into a whole nother hour on that one. But I do want to ask you something, to go back to whiteness. I mean, you've talked a lot about what the three of you are doing to educate yourselves and to better yourselves as people, and how your passion for craft beer, you know, isn't about, it's about so much more than just craft beer. It's about who you are as a person. There's so many identities that come together to form each of you. But, you know, what can people like me, what can the rest of us do to be better? You know, so many times people think that you can brew Black is Beautiful and your brewery is somehow inclusive. You've taken the steps to do what you need to do, but it's not a Band-Aid. You don't just fix it with that. There's so many aspects of this, and it's not just one that just you fix by slapping that Band-Aid on and it gets better. It's an ongoing process to educate yourself and be better and make a difference. What advice, what steps, what are your thoughts on what the rest of us can do to make our world of craft beer more inclusive for all, and equitable for all?
I personally sometimes find a lot of challenge with that question, and I think a lot of other people of color do as well, because it's exhausting to have white people kind of consistently ask like, what can we do? And it really operates on this assumption that like people of color are the ones who are meant to be teaching and solving this problem that we didn't create. So, I mean, while I find a lot of frustration in that question, like outside of you alone, Andrew, just in general, that sentiment, I mean, I think simply like, I think that one of the most important things is like a shift in resources and power, which I think is something that a lot of people are unwilling to do. Simply like to give up power is to ask a lot of people who, especially people who've possessed it for a very long time. But I think that like being unapologetically outspoken about racial justice and like why these things matter, and doing, I mean, the work, putting in the work yourself, and about how you should be, putting in the work to be I don't really like the word ally, and I'm not the biggest fan of the word accomplice, but like just educating your way through these problems, and figuring out what your place is, and learning your history, and what part that you've had in this this debacle, this state of the world as it is today. I don't know how to put that. And then continuing to like use that and leveraging your power to make sure that there are other people who are able to like to enter this space more accessibly. And one of the biggest things that we often hear when we talk about like Black people specifically in beer is that like it's just not the most accessible world. Being like mostly, it's like a very white world. It's I mean, for a lot of reasons that we can talk about in another time. But yeah, I mean, I think hiring practices is a big one, like having more equitable hiring practices, and understanding that like it's about a lot more than just having people of color in your room that you're asking to like be like you and fit in with your work culture. Like that's a stupid conversation. Like you're not looking for people to fit in with you. That's the antithesis of what you're attempting to do here. But yeah, just being willing to like challenge yourself and challenge your own ego, and not being afraid of like being wrong, because you will be, and you have been for a very long time. I don't know. I think that's probably baseline. There are a lot of things that you could do, like giving money to people of color and like, again, this like shift of resources that needs to happen. But on a very base level, just like get with it.
Get with it. I like it. And I know the question is so tough, and there's not, like I said, there's not that Band-Aid you can slap on it. There's not the checklist of how to be more inclusive. It's just an ongoing process. And I don't think, we can make it happen overnight. It needs to be just something we go in that direction. Now, Gloria and Sarah, what are your thoughts? I mean, to echo what Kelsey said, there's not that solution you're going to give us right now to fix all the problems of the world. But what do you see worthwhile to shift the debacle in a better direction?
I think just having these kinds of conversations that we're having right now, having these Zoom types of discussions, I think has really been a great way to just kind of put your cards out on the table if you so feel like that's what you want to do. I think that's a step in the right direction. I don't think it's anything that's going to be solved overnight, obviously. But I think just having these types of forums really is a wonderful thing.
In Craft Beer Professionals, there's been a lot of threads recently on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And sometimes, unfortunately, they get a little nasty. They get a little confrontational. And that's unfortunate. But I like to look at it as, just like you said, Gloria, the conversations are being had. They're tough conversations. They're important conversations. And hopefully we all come out of them better and more educated to go in a more positive direction. And Sarah, is there anything you would like to add to this?
Oh man,
I know. It's tough to do in an hour.
That question's always been one of those ones, definitely. But if I tell everyone, and quite blankly, just because I have teenagers, just don't suck. Stop sucking. Do better. Be a better person. There's no reason for any of the intolerance or the injustice that all of us have been dealing with in our entire lives. And for me, it's been also to take that moment and put that person in their place. This year has been the first year of my life where I have turned back around and said, you know what? Actually, you're wrong, and this is what you're doing wrong, and I'm no longer going to be in your circle or in your energy or anything like that, and you're not going to take my day. It's not going to happen. So it's
not sucking.
Just be
I think do better really summarizes the conversation today. I mean, craft beer, we've made progress. We've got a long way to go. And I think all we can really say is what you just said, Sarah. We need to do better. Gloria, we need to keep having these conversations. And Kelsey, there's not that one size fits all solution. We just have to keep working, stay positive. And 2020, it's been quite the year, but I'm glad these conversations are being had. I really, really appreciate the three of you, joining me today. Eugenia and her initiative, it's so necessary. She's putting a bright light in craft beer. I love what she's doing. I absolutely love her enthusiasm. So Eugenia, if you're watching or listening later, thank you for organizing this. Thank you for building a community to empower people to do big things. So ladies, I appreciate this once again, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of the day. And thanks everybody for tuning in. See you later.
Thank you.